enough to have a great one as you are, and I was, takes you into places that your imagination couldn't take you on your own. It kind of helps you find your way. If there's one thing that I've really tried to cultivate in my own teaching is your gift for getting people to draw things out of themselves. There are a lot of teachers who just stand up at the front of the room and lecture and tell you what everything's supposed to mean, and don't give you the opportunity to discover it. And the really gifted ones, like Miss Worsham, I'll probably keep calling her Patty, but
It's okay.
Okay. You know, the really gifted teachers are the ones who figure out how to ask the right question that's going to get you to get there on your own, and figure out the way that a great book tells you who you are. I had a professor in grad school who made this observation to me: are real. Right? And the feeling that you get when you are part of something, be it an athletic event or a performance event or any other sort of competition where you put your heart and soul into it, and you deliver, and there's a response, and you feel gratified and edified and elevated, right, above the world for just a few minutes because of something that you've been able to achieve. That's the beginning. That's the kind of juice that you need as an artist to keep going. Because if there's one thing that's common in the experience of artists and writers, if you haven't figured it out already, is suffering, rejection, futility, and many, many years for most writers and artists of never getting a break. And if you get a break, it doesn't matter. You still got to pay the bills, and art doesn't pay that well unless you're really, really lucky. And so, most people, I mean, if I'd known what I was getting myself into when I decided that I would go kind of down that road of trying to be a writer based off of those really positive experiences that I had in high school, if I could have looked into the future, I might have said, I'll try something else. But those first kind of great experiences are the ones that give you the feeling that this is a purpose that you can find for yourself. And as a teacher, what I would hope for you, that whatever you do is something that you feel purpose-driven to do, and not something that you have to do. There are going to be things that you're going to have to do in life. It took me a long time to accept that we have to do things, right, that maybe we don't want to do because they are our duties to our families, to the people that love us. You're going to have to make a living. You're going to have adult responsibilities sooner than you expect. But within the framework of those responsibilities, I hope that what you will do is find something that fills you with that sense of purpose. Not passion every day, because it's not always going to be like that, but purpose. Like that what you're doing is something that matters, not just to you, but to other people, and that you're making not necessarily the world, but the world around you better, richer, more meaningful, safer, happier, a little less alone. Right? And if that's the one thing that people come back to again and again about what matters in books, the value that we get out of reading a novel is that it makes you feel less alone in the world when you see your own life reflected back to you. Anyway, getting back to where I was before, I went kind of on this wild tangent. I went to college, and I thought I was going to just write the great American novel in college and be on my own private jet by the time I was 25. Didn't happen. I kind of knocked around a little bit. I went to grad school at UVA. I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll get a PhD and be a professor, and then I'll write the great American novel because I wanted to have the fancy degree. And that didn't work out for me. I just couldn't slog through it. After, I guess, the summer after my first year of grad school, my dad died, and that just really kind of threw everything into a tailspin for me, and I didn't really know what to do with myself. I just knew I wasn't happy doing what I was doing. I lost that sense of purpose that I'd felt before. And so I went and I wandered around. I had some friends who were living out in Colorado, and I went out there and kicked around for a while, and I had so much fun I had to leave. And then I came back, and I ended up down in grad school at Florida State, which has got a really strong creative writing program, and I came under the influence of some really powerful important mentors there, in particular a guy named Bob Shikochis, who was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. He was Pulitzer Prize finalist just a couple years ago, lost to The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which is one of my favorite books now. And after I read that, and I was calling him up to kind of console him and say, hey, congratulations, I mean, being a finalist is great, and I mean, hey, you shouldn't feel too bad. I mean, The Goldfinch is a really awesome book. And he was not ready to hear that. But I do really like The Goldfinch. And so while I was, he kind of became this kind of father figure to me, and he's kind of this classic, Hemingway, Norman Mailer, big beard, kind of rough and tumble, constantly smoking the cigarettes, starting fights at dinner parties, and when I was in workshop, it was like workshop wasn't a good workshop unless somebody ran from the room crying, It was that kind of, sort of real, these guys don't really exist anymore because everybody's so polite in the literary world now, and everybody's got really good manners, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, right? This sort of badass. He'd been a war correspondent, he ducked the bullets, and done all of this really manly stuff, and I didn't feel like I was a very manly guy at the time, so I wanted to hang out with him. And I went and I spent a summer with him in New Mexico. He has this house kind of up in the mountains. It's really kind of like a compound. It's really kind of hippie, creepy, weird, and awesome. And well water, solar power, just sort of great adventure for somebody like me that just loves that type of stuff. And while I was out there, I met some people that were involved in heroin and meth dealing, and I just kind of heard about all these little stories that were going on there, and I decided that's the kind of book I'm going to write. I'm going to write this book about drug dealers and intrigue and menace and
Breaking Bad, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, what time did I?
Let's see. This is we get out at 9.
We get out at
15.
9:15. All right,
Yeah.
cool. I just want to make
That's
sure
right.
I have like 5 different versions of this talk, and they're all sorted on different timelines. So I want to make sure I'm on the right timeline. I worked on that book, and I actually think it was a pretty good book. I worked on it for almost 7 years, and it helped me get an agent in New York, a really prominent, successful, kind of big-time agent. And I thought, that's it. That's all it takes. You get the agent, then they sell the book, then comes the private jet. And it didn't happen. We worked on it together for about a year, and then she sent the book out, and we just didn't get anything. I mean, I got some polite rejections. I was compared in a few of these rejections to the writers that I wanted to be compared to, but they didn't buy the book. And by this time I'd kind of crept past my 30s, and life had changed a lot for me. And I just, it was a pretty devastating blow because I was so sure that it was going to be a big success, and I'd worked on it for so long. But like Patty was just mentioning, something had happened along the way, and what had happened was that Breaking Bad had come out, and people began to migrate towards television for those kinds of stories. And that's something that you have to be aware of when you're writing, is that there are audiences for different kinds of stories, and if there's no audience for your story, you're wasting your time. Maybe you're not wasting your time in terms of the satisfaction you're going to get out of it, but nobody's going to want to read it, right? Or the people that might have wanted to read it are going to find that story someplace else. Well, by that time, I'd gotten married, we'd had a baby. I decided that I needed to get a better job than I could get teaching at a university at the time without having finished my degree. So I went and I started teaching at this prep school in Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I still work now. I'd really become tame. I'd kind of calmed down. I'd cut my hair. I stopped doing all the things that were bad for me, and was a responsible teacher and parent. And I knew all the songs from Frozen and all of the Disney princesses and their pets, and everything about my life was really domestic at that point. And so once I realized that the book that I'd written wasn't going to sell, I knew I wanted to write another one, but I just didn't know where to begin, and so I started thinking about it. And what I realized was that I could never write a book like that. That was an inauthentic book to who I am. And again, this is one of those things you have to be mindful of, no matter what you do, right? Because I know that most of you guys are, maybe a few of you guys are curious about writing, and maybe you want to write a story, and you have a dream maybe of doing something like that. But most of you guys have other dreams. But within whatever dream you have to strive to be authentic. And if you drift away from yourself and you try to put yourself into a box where you don't belong, it's not going to work. You're going to end up being in a place where you're not happy and you're not satisfied with what you've set out to do, which is kind of where I found myself. So I was like, well, what do I do? How do I fix this? So I just kind of sat around and I thought, all right, well, where did it start for me? Where did I ever, I'd forgotten that it had been so long. Where did I ever think that I, had a story to tell? Where did it begin for me? And it began, as I've already mentioned, here, and then back in my childhood when I became exposed to some things that had been happening in my family that were really intense and sort of moments of awareness that had kind of opened the world up for me. The big one in particular was that when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, I came home one night after I'd been down at a friend's house, and I got a call down there, and it was my mother calling for me to come home. I thought I was in trouble because we were watching an R-rated movie. 10 years old, and when I got home, I came in the door and I looked over and I could see in the room over to the side, my dad was sitting there and one of his best friends was with him and he had his arm around him and my dad was crying. He was really crying, right? Never seen that before. He was one of these big tough guys who never showed emotion. And just the mere fact of tears coming out of his face struck me as this kind of bellwether moment. It really floored me. And then my mother came out and she took me over to the side and we sat down in the living room. She explained to me that the reason that my father was crying was that my older half-sister, my father had been married before he married my mother and had another family first, right? And my older half-sister was in the hospital because she'd attempted suicide. She'd swallowed a whole bottle of extra-strength Tylenol pills and she was on life support at that time. The doctors thought it was probably one of those cry for help type things, but unfortunately she decided to cry for help in a way that was pretty dangerous. Tylenol is a very lethal drug. It will destroy your liver if you take it in high dosages. And so she barely survived. And as a result of that, I began to be exposed to all of these facts about my family that I hadn't been aware of, that my older sister was really profoundly mentally ill and had been struggling with that for a really long time, and that I'd just kind of been sheltered from that my whole childhood. And so I grew up with that and kind of came into adolescence and coming, first to Lincoln and then here, kind of being aware and feeling like my family was really strange, like this was something that only we were going through and that all of the kind of traumas and complications and feelings of alienation that I had were very unique to me. Now that I'm older, I realize that they're not, that everybody's struggling with things like this, that maybe not as profoundly or as tragically as my sister's situation, but every family has got its things. And in communities like Lynchburg, right, which is, very conservative, traditional, kind of proper community, this is true here too. It's just that everybody tries, to kind of put on that face and go through life acting like there's nothing wrong at home and nobody's got any problems. And so when you know that that's not true about you, and you feel on the inside that there are things that there's turmoil swirling inside of you that you can't show to the world because nobody else is experiencing that and everybody else's life is plain and normal and cool and easy, it changes you. And I realized that also that was part of the reason, that was part of what made me need people in my life like Patty or Jim Ackley, who I felt like were listening to me and who were aware of the fact that we weren't all okay. And I was telling this story the other day. Something even more terrible happened to me, to all of us, to my group of friends when we were juniors here at class. This was before I had Patty as a teacher, but Jim Ackley was my teacher at this time. One of my best friends growing up, a guy named Philip Jones, who was an absolute legend in the halls of EC Glass in his time here. I mean, he hit this place like a freight train as a 9th grader and was just immediately recognized as one of the most charismatic, talented, and brilliant kids that had ever walked the halls of this school. I had forgotten this happened, but Patty reminded me. He got invited to the prom as a freshman, right? Everybody knew this guy.
And wore tennis shoes.
And wore
his
Chuck
he was
Taylors.
his own guy from the beginning, real long hair, and just so brilliant.
And he was reading things that, I couldn't comprehend until I got to graduate school. And hey, come on in.
Sorry,
No
this
worries.
is Michaela.
Nice to meet you there. And, just bursting with talent and energy. And he wrote poetry, and he wanted to be a writer, and he was going to go to the University of California at Berkeley, and he was reading, you know, Nietzsche and Sartre and Proust and all of these writers that, you know, I would never have heard of if it wasn't for him. And he had listened to everything. Like, his music collection was absolutely, you know, the coolest music collection ever, and I never would have listened to all this music if he hadn't kind of pushed it on me. But things kind of went south for Philip for reasons that, you know, are way too complicated for me to explain right here. And something terrible happened to him. He passed away. I remember we were at the Virginia Theater Association competition when it happened, and I had seen him the night before at City Stadium at an EC Glass football game. It was the last time I ever saw him. And then the next morning after we'd done our play, the phone rang in our room. I was taking a shower because the play that we were doing required us to, we were supposed to be street kids, so everybody was like really dirty, and so everybody was cleaning up after we'd done the play. And I came out, and another friend of ours, a guy named Jared Sorsick, who's a restaurant owner in town now, built Millstone Tea Room. You guys probably know out in Becker. He was sitting there, and he was crying, and I was like, what the hell's going on? And he explained to me that Philip was dead. And that was just, you know, it just shook all of us because it was so, like, unreal. And we spent the whole day, Jared and I, walking around Richmond, Virginia, and the parts of Richmond that, you know, 10th and 11th grade, you know, kids from the suburbs should not be walking around by themselves. And it's in a state of, you know, just complete bewilderment in a daze. And I remember when we came back after that on Monday that everybody said, you know, a lot of our friends were like, we're not going to school this week, it's just too much, we can't even imagine trying to go through the motions of school. I was among those whose parents said, no, if you're going to school, you're going to get on with your life, and you know, we've got to move forward. But it was pointless, you know. I mean, and, gosh, they probably should have canceled school. I mean, I think everybody was kind of walking around, you know, just in a real state of disorientation. I mean, I think, you know, some of the teachers even were probably incapable of pulling it together to teach class that day. And I remember I just couldn't do anything. And that first period class was senior acting in the basement. Do they still do it down there? Yeah? Okay, cool. So I was down there in the basement, and Ackley could just tell, you know, that I wasn't right. And, you know, the rest of the kids kind of went out into the hallway, and he told me to stay back. And he just sat down on the couch next to me, and he put his arm around me, and I just crumbled. You know, I just fell to pieces. As you know, no one else, I think, could have done that for me in that moment, right? To be sensitive, to be present, and to be sensitive to the fact that, you know, I was right there on the edge, as were many other people. But you know, he was the one who was present for me, and I was the one who was kind of given to him. And so, you know, again, to sort of circle back, that's what I got here. That's what mattered to me, and what should matter to you is that, you know, there are people, you probably aren't even aware of it, who are paying attention to you, and they're sensitive to what's going on. And so that made me realize, you know, these were the moments, these were the places that, you know, awakened my imagination and made me feel that I had a story to tell. So I went back and kind of went into memory. And if you do read this book, which I hope you will with permission, because it's definitely a book for grown-ups, it's not a young adult novel. There's nothing in there you can't handle, but I'm just...
They read Beloved.
Yeah, seriously. After that, this is small potatoes, right? But you'll see things, stories that you won't recognize, but situations that should be very familiar to you. Because I think as I've gotten older, and particularly as I've become a teacher, I've discovered, as I said before, that things that I thought were only happening to me were happening to everybody. And, you know, everyone was being touched in the same ways by the same struggles, be it the struggles of their families or the struggles of their own identities, trying to figure out who they were. You know, my wife and I were kind of talking about this the other day because I saw so many old friends over the weekend, and I was kind of explaining to her how, you know, okay, well, I didn't really fit into any particular box when I was here. You know, there was, okay, well, I wanted to hang out with the athletes or whatever, but I was really more comfortable with the theater kids. And then I had my friends who, were kind of the artistic, freaky types that I, always was really comfortable with and drawn to. And so there's this constant struggle for identity that's going on, and usually at a certain point you just have to choose, okay, which camp do I belong to? But you're never quite at home in your own skin, or I wasn't anyway, right? And I suspect that I'm not alone here. And that's a challenge to figure out, how do you survive in this world that's not homogenous, and yet everyone seems to kind of clump off into homogenous places, and everyone tries to put on the pose of being cool and comfortable and without any kind of challenges or obstacles, when in reality, down deep everybody is. So that's kind of, I think you'll see that in the story. Story about a kid who's kind of trying to grasp for meaning, trying to find an identity, trying to figure out who he is and where he belongs in the world, and how the relationships that he has to other people who he either loves or is shaped by, how those things sort of pull him into where he is. I think we read and write stories because we're trying to make sense of the world for ourselves, right? We're trying to reconcile the parts that don't work for us. We're trying to find a sense of peace or closure in relationships that are complicated and not easy. I'm writing sometimes to try to figure out who my father was, right? And to forgive him for not being perfect, and to forgive myself for not being more reasonable in my judgment of him until it was too late to fix it, right? We're writing and we're reading to find some truths about ourselves, some of which are going to be very unique to you as a person, and some of which are going to be the same for everybody. And so that's what I try to do. I think of fiction as being a useful illusion, right? It's not true, it's not real, it's not factual, but it is one hopes true. That's what you want, is to tell a true story. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And if you guys have any questions for me about anything, I'll be happy to answer.
You want to read a little bit?
Do you want me to read?
You want to read a little bit?
I can. We got 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And we talked a lot about how to tell a true story when we read Things They Carry.
Yeah.
And that had I think that had a lot of good insight in it. It's how you feel, not the happening truth.
Sure. I mean, we talked, I ripped that off on Saturday, and I owe you a great debt for giving that to me. You got any favorites there in this version?
I kind of liked what you read the other day about you and your dad.
Okay. It's nice and short. I'll actually start from the beginning part. Kind of when you get into the middle of the story, there's the narrator has gone through some things. His name is Rocky. His name's Richard, but his brother called him Rocky, so he likes the nickname. And his brother's gone off and done some terrible things and disappeared from their lives for a period of years. And his brother's girlfriend, who was kind of his first big crush, who's a young woman named Lee, has gone through some other things that are pretty terrible and suffered a breakdown from mental illness, which again, I've already talked a little bit. It's kind of a personal story for me. And the narrator's father has suffered a debilitating stroke. And so this little piece gives you a little my vision of Lynchburg, and also the part of the story that I think is the most true in the Tim O'Brien sense for me. Lee began making her rounds to read in nursing homes and the houses of shut-ins on an old Schwinn 5-speed bike with a basket on the front, a bell on the handlebars, and one of those wide granny seats. Anita begged Lee not to ride around like that, warning her that she'd catch her death of cold, but enthralled by the relative freedom after so many weeks and months of confinement in sterile hospital rooms and somnambulistic rest facilities, Lee insisted. We soon became accustomed to the sight of Lee merrily riding that old bike down Bonnie Lane and all around Boone's Ferry with a stack of books in her basket, cheeks pink from the frigid cold, the tail of her coat flapping in the wind behind her. Before long, she was a fixture, another eccentric institution like the town drunk. Gradually, I stopped thinking of Lee in terms of who she used to be or might have been. Something about the shamelessness with which Lee met the condescending scrutiny of Spencerville made her seem almost heroic. However we may have pitied her, the old man and William and I still looked forward to her visits. Thanks to Lee, we all became experts on popular titles for the evangelical set. At times, I even felt myself nearing some sort of spiritual enlightenment until the end of the day's reading, when the sight of Lee tooling off down the driveway on her bicycle reminded me that she was in fact insane. February came, and with it a half foot of snow and a long night of freezing rain that formed a hard crust almost thick enough to walk